Thank you, everybody, for being here today. To all the panelists and guests this lovely Wednesday morning here in New York to this hybrid event titled The Role of Blended Finance in LDCs and Potential for Private Sector Investments, where we'll be discussing challenges and private sector opportunities around the missing middle gap in the financing architecture in the LDCs. I'll hand the floor over to Ambassador Ray for his welcome remarks. Thank you, Ambassador, for hosting us in your offices today.
Thank you very much. We're delighted to have everybody here, and we're delighted that we're able to participate in this moment. I think it's an important time for development and for peace and for innovation, and we really appreciate the fact that everyone is here. Very happy to participate in the panel later on. I won't take advantage of the fact that I have the microphone to make a long speech early in the morning, but really look forward to this discussion. We're both online and in here. My only suggestion is that you put on your mutes, as we all still have to do. Thank you so much. Great to be here.
Thank you, Ambassador. Now I would like to welcome our Executive Secretary, Preeti Sinha. Ms. Preeti Sinha is Executive Secretary of UNCDF, who has had an illustrious career of 30 years as an investment and development banker across well-known institutions like African Development Bank and Aabo Bank. I would now invite Ms. Sinha to give her welcoming remarks.
Thank you, Abhisheik, and thank you, Your Excellency, Ambassador Ray, for this wonderful event. I truly believe this is a game-changing moment where we will make some announcements and really welcome this collaboration, this partnership with those on the panel here, online, and those watching. So with that, welcome to everyone. This is the fourth event that we are hosting at UNCDF during this week of the FFT Forum. So it's been a really remarkable week and a really great opportunity for us to share what we are doing, to learn from you, and really bring together this momentous path forward in which we can use both public and private capital to really impact lives. Before I get into my remarks, let me acknowledge all the speakers who are here, who are mostly our partners. Therefore, let me turn now to Madam Honorable Fatou Kinteh, Minister of Gender, Children and Social Welfare, the Gambia. Welcome, Your Excellency. It was a real pleasure to see you as well in New York a few weeks ago.
Thank you very much.
Great. Mr. Jean-Philippe de Schrevel, founder and managing partner, Bamboo Capital Partners, a close friend and colleague and partner. JP?
Yes, hi. Thank you, Preeti, and very nice to be with you today.
Thank you. His Excellency, Ambassador Robert Ray, Canada's permanent representative to the UN. Anders Aabo, Senior Advisor, Norad. Isabel Leroux, Program Manager, NDF.
Hello, good morning, good afternoon.
Thank you. Karin Svensson, Senior Advisor, SIDA.
Good morning from Stockholm. Very happy to be with you from Stockholm today.
Thank you. James Cashman, Director, Global Transaction, the USDFC.
Thank you, Preeti, and thank you, Ambassador, for hosting us today. Excited to be part of this forum.
And Thomas Lammar, Counsellor, the Permanent Mission of Luxembourg to the UN.
Good morning, and thank you for inviting me to this panel.
Of course. So with that bit of a warm-up, let's move on to some of the topics that I would like to suggest today. So blended finance is not new to us. It's often discussed between development finance actors, institutional investors, and policymakers at all levels of governments. The truth is about the conversation, but today we are taking that conversation into action. We are optimizing the full potential of blended finance so that we can really unlock private capital in support of the SDG achievement in the geographies where it is needed the most. The same areas that have been traditionally ignored by the global financial architecture, the frontier markets of today, and certainly the growth markets of tomorrow. I absolutely believe that the blended finance has a great potential to deliver the robust levels of finance that are needed for the SDG agenda. And the powerful symbol of today's group of stakeholders and speakers reflect precisely the broad ecosystem of development finance actors that is needed to ensure this potential. As an organization of UNCDF, we aspire to be the UN's flagship catalytic financing agency, particularly focused on the least developed countries. By leveraging our ability to issue concessional loans and guarantees in the UN system into any level of public and private capital, we believe we seek to really demonstrate that investing in the last mile settings really leads to positive investment, positive development outcomes that are both commercially viable and scalable with the right blend of instruments and support. We can also provide a pipeline of bankable projects that can advance the SDG achievement. And here in the pipeline, I was mentioning to some of the panelists, is really garnering the aspirations, the entrepreneurship of the people on the ground, and really recognizing that it exists, just needs to be supported, invested, and then hopefully lead to self-reliance. Additionally, as represented by the Bamboo Capital Partners, we need private sector partners. We often speak about it, and I'm really glad this is an opportunity to show that it really works. There are these actors that can help crowd in additional finance for investments and ensure that the promising blend of finance can be accelerated and scaled up. These include on the private sector, the impact investors, domestic and international commercial banks, capital market actors, private foundations, family offices, mobile network operators, and financial technology companies as well. Finally, as represented by honorable country representatives and development finance institutions, these can provide the levels of concessional financing that can help de-risk and unlock that private capital, demonstrating the viability for further larger follow-on private sector investment. So this true partnership is a commitment for the SDGs that the SDGs deserve, a true stewardship. So when a varied group of actors, as we all represent, are able to work together, we truly optimize the potential of blended finance to its utmost. In particularly filling the development finance gap by financing projects whose capital needs are too large for grant funding and microfinance and too small for the large capital providers. Therefore, in particular, the sector that we look at today is called the missing middle. That's where it's a crucial sector really to invest in the SMEs that can go into future greater companies. So this leads me to the announcement today. I am so proud to be at this game-changing moment to announce some of the developments in the Build Fund. The Build Fund is an innovative blended impact finance vehicles co-created with Bamboo Capital Partners and UNCDF with all your partnership. This is one of not many of the funds that are focused on the LDCs. Today, we are proud to announce that more than 60 million in financing has been committed to the Build Fund. This funding will enable the Build Fund to achieve its mission of unlocking finance for the SMEs and entities that have potential for strong development impact in the world's frontier markets, as we like to call our least developed countries. I would like to thank you on behalf of myself and the UNCDF team, the contributions of the financial commitments that we are announcing today to the government of Luxembourg, which was the anchor investment in the Build Fund, Global Affairs Canada, representing the government of Canada, Norad, representing the government of Norway, Nordic Development Fund, the Swedish International Development Cooperation Agency, representing the government of Sweden, and the US Development Finance Corporation, representing the government of the United States. Today's announcement represents a major step forward for the cause of achieving the SDGs in order to leave no one behind. And it is also a proud day for UNCDF. I turn to my colleagues as we look forward to be able to achieve our vision of accessing and leveraging the development impact of capital to enable sustainable and inclusive growth. Thank you very much, and I turn it back to you.
Thank you, Ms. Sinha, for your welcoming remarks. I now have the pleasure of inviting Honorable Fatou Kinteh, Minister of Gender, Children and Social Welfare. Honorable Fatou Kinteh served as Program Officer, Information, Education and Communication of Gambia Family Planning Association for 7 years. She then earned her master's degree in Population and Development at the University of Wales. Before her current appointment as Minister, Ms. Kinteh was National Coordinator, FGM and Gender at the UNFPA. Ms. Kinteh, the floor is yours. Please unmute yourself, Ms. Kinteh.
Thank you very much. Permit me, Mr. Chairperson, to recognize the presence of Preeti, the ED of UNCDF, development partners represented here today, donor partners also represented here, all of the protocols duly observed. Distinguished ladies and gentlemen, I am honored to be accorded the opportunity to deliver the opening remarks of the session on the role of blended finance in LDCs and the potential for private sector investment. Organized by one of our most renowned partners in the Gambia, the United Nations Capital Development Fund, UNCDF, co-hosted by the permanent mission to Canada, to the United States, United Nations. We gather here today for two main reasons. First, to accentuate the need for blended finance and how donors can accelerate its progress through UNCDF. And secondly, to facilitate dialogues on the importance of development finance institutions, potential investing companies, donors, and governments of these developing countries. Under the LDCs category, we are aware that the African countries have for decades been experiencing pervasive poverty, and the Gambia is no exception to this unfortunate phenomenon. Additionally, the advent of the COVID-19 pandemic and its corollary effects engendered an additional and increasingly prominent threat to achieving and sustaining socio-economic development. This state of affairs has posed further challenges which extensively affect gender inequalities, and efforts being made to bridge the gaps in gender inequality. Ladies and gentlemen, it is common knowledge that women and girls are significantly affected by the COVID-19 economic repercussions. Significant steps have been taken for economic empowerment of women through several legislative acts, such as the Women Enterprise Fund in the Gambia, all directed at the welfare of Gambian women and their families. However, in spite of the numerous efforts being made by the government of Gambia, we believe that there is so much more that needs to be done. One such area that needs to be addressed is issues relating to the weak financial ecosystem and inadequate capacity to leverage digital solutions and thereby empowering women through enhanced financial inclusion. In the light of these challenges, ladies and gentlemen, UNCDF, through the Women Enterprise Fund project, conducted a financial inclusion and digital literacy initiative training program in support of the Ministry of Gender, Children and Social Welfare of the Gambia. In a similar vein, we are seeking support to improve financial inclusion, digital and financial literacy, and to build the resilience of the negative impacts of COVID-19 on women-owned small and medium enterprises and initiatives. In building post-COVID-19 resilience, we must also explore business development services to cater for sector-specific services such as market linkages, packaging and advertising, subcontracting and outsourcing, to name but a few. This brings me to the crucial need for blending finance as a strategy to eliminate barriers to financial inclusion in developing countries. We continue to face challenges, both locally and internationally, ranging from financial and capacity gaps, such as lack of capital and technical expertise, long-term frames for loan recoveries, as well as high transaction costs and others. As a result, we call for close collaboration between development finance organizations, potential investing companies, donors, and LDC governments to utilize blended finance to support national projects that would in turn address the challenges that are too gigantic for anyone to solve on their own. The Build Enterprise Resource Technical Assistance Facility is therefore very timely, as it will create employment and additional financing for women-led SMEs, which in the long run will eliminate poverty. I would therefore like to take this opportunity to thank the donors for supporting the Build Fund, as the technical assistance component of the project is expected to improve financial models and business plans that are required by potential investors. Distinguished ladies and gentlemen, I would like to strongly put emphasis on the need to maintain the bilateral relationship and partnership with UNCDF and its donors in expanding the mutual efforts to ensure that the sustainable development goals are achieved. For this reason, I reiterate the commitment of the Ministry of Gender, Children and Social Welfare on behalf of the government of the Gambia, the need to expand partnership with UNCDF and similar donor agencies on more developmental projects. Let me also take this opportunity to strongly reiterate the need for women access to finance, as women make up to 50% of the population of the Gambia. However, there is a huge gender gap in account ownership, and women are half more likely to hold bank accounts than men. Also, literacy rates in the Gambia is 63.9% for males and 47.6% for females. This needs to be factored in our programs. For this reason, I urge UNCDF and other donor partners to consider supporting the Women Enterprise Fund, which is a different entity that targets women groups not registered through microfinances or banks. The Women Enterprise Fund is under a legal framework governed and guaranteed by a board with an account under the Central Bank of the Gambia. The Women Enterprise Fund possesses the advantage over the banks and microfinance institutions for the significant difference on interest rates compared to the latter. An estimated 15 to 25% for banks and microfinance institutions, to which, in the contrary, the Women Enterprise Fund is at an interest rate of 5%, paid after a grace period of 6 months. For this reason, I urge donor partners to support the Women Enterprise Fund as a women empowerment, economic empowerment initiative on entrepreneurship, financial empowerment, capacity building, and financial literacy, digital finance solution. And in so doing, let us ensure that the interest rates remain low and that the entrepreneurship and livelihood skills component of the project continue to complement each other. With these remarks, I would like to take this opportunity to thank development partners and UNCDF who have consistently supported the development of women and girls through the job skills finance component for women and youth in the Gambia program, funded by the European Union. The project, through its components, seeks to support and increase access to inclusive finance by urging a market system approach to support the development and scale-up of targeted financial services and products, particularly for women and the development of financial inclusive markets. In conclusion, I would like to take this opportunity to wish you all a successful deliberation and welcome all of you, distinguished speakers, participants, and moderators to this event. I will now hand over the floor to our able moderator, Mr. Dhawan. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Honorable Fatou Kinteh, for your remarks. I have now the honor to welcome our next speaker, Mr. Jean-Philippe Richevel, founder and managing partner for Bamboo Capital Partners. JP has dedicated most of his career to the development of the impact investing field, of which he is considered to be a global pioneer. Jean-Philippe notably co-founded in 2001 Blue Orchid Finance, a pioneer commercial lender to microfinance banks. And he has worked at McKinsey & Company in the UN as well as for various NGOs. The floor is yours, JP.
Thank you very much, and good morning, good afternoon, everyone. It's sincerely a real pleasure to be with you today, and I must say a real honor to represent the whole Bamboo team, who has worked actually really hard over the last couple of years with our friends and partners at UNCDF and with all the fund service providers and partners, Citibank, the One Group, Deloitte, Arendt, Consilium Capital, and of course the Palladium Group, to make the Build Fund a reality. I'd like also to take the opportunity to thank Global Affairs Canada, Norad, SIDA, USDFC, the Nordic Development Fund, and of course our anchor investor, the government of Luxembourg, for their trust and enthusiasm in supporting this initiative. It's been said already, the Build Fund is a much needed investment vehicle which will contribute to tackle the access to financing for SMEs in the least developed countries in key sectors such as access to clean energy, agriculture, food security, and financial inclusion, always with a keen and core angle on climate change mitigation and gender justice. Today, as Preeti said, is an important milestone. The Build Fund is open-ended and has set itself very ambitious objectives for growth and impact over the next few years. And today, it is off to an amazing start with a significant first loss contribution of about $45 million, including a $10 million guarantee complemented by a $10 million loan. Our pipeline is active, significant, diversified, and jointly with UNCDF, we will aim to deploy the capital quickly where it is most needed. But this will not be an easy job. The pandemic significantly affected value chains in frontier and emerging markets. And unfortunately, the Ukraine crisis will have lasting and brutal effects on international trade, food security, supply chains for many, many least developed countries. But this is also precisely why we need to maintain and increase our efforts today to support SMEs providing lifeline to large segments of frontier markets populations and contributing to advancing the sustainable development goals in frontier markets and in these countries. So therefore, we are also truly thankful for the 6 donors and governments who have come together to support the Build Fund at this juncture. We believe it's also still time for other governments and development finance institutions to add their contributions and their forces. Remember, the Build Fund is an open-ended fund, meaning we can receive contributions in investment on an ongoing basis. Now, with the fund first loss really well capitalized, and once the portfolio will have ramped up to some decent levels, it will then be the turn of the private sector to join forces in order to leverage multiple times the first loss catalytic money through investments in the mezzanine and the senior share classes of the Build Fund. This could, and maybe I'm dreaming, but this could even be in the future taking the form of a participation by the Build Fund in a larger impact fund coalition, seeking private institutional sector in financing through a new type of SDG bond financing and issuance. At least this is something I am and Bamboo is going to continue working on in the next few months and years, because we are truly convinced that this would represent a groundbreaking way of scaling tremendously real impact financing for SMEs in frontier markets. And this within solid, complementary, global public-private partnership using blended finance mechanisms. So let me finish by thanking UNCDF for choosing Bamboo as a partner to co-create and manage this Build Fund. And thank you to all of our investors for your trust and support. We truly look forward to working with you all to make the Build Fund a great success. Thank you.
Thank you, JP. May I now invite Mr. Anders Berlin to introduce UNCDF's blended finance approach and build pipeline. Mr. Berlin is the director of LDC investment platform at UNCDF. He has previously had the post of head of unit for loans and guarantees at the Swedish International Development Cooperation Agency, SIDA, managing a portfolio consisting of approximately 50 project programs around the world, mostly in Africa and Asia. Over to you, Anders.
Thank you, Abhisheik, and good morning, good afternoon to all of you. It's a pleasure to be here. So just a few words on background to the Build Fund. So when I joined UNCDF in 2016, I found an organization that was like a giant prep facility. So we were dishing out grants to private entities, and they were growing. Management at that point had decided that we should have a fund. So that was given to me at my table. So why don't you start a fund? And we did a bit of review of the organization and we did a platform. So we started building a platform. We did the policies, we did legal templates, a process, independent risk committee, etc. And we started issuing loans. But what we found was when we were issuing loans that these companies were growing, but they couldn't really access financing in the next step. So that's when we sort of started thinking of how can we find a solution for that, and how can we partner with somebody that can actually pay return to capital, which we couldn't. So we launched RFP in 2018, and Bamboo Capital was selected as our partner, and they obviously can take in commercial capital and pay return, which was difficult for us. In our discussion and the division of roles that we had between us, we agreed that UNCDF's role would be to raise awareness for the fund, so it gets capitalized. And of course, we have maybe a bit different constituency than Bamboo, so it was good complementarity there. We also got a role to manage the TA facility. And let me just say a few words on that. So it's up and running now. We have a TA facility manager, and we have a process, a policy, a diagnostic tool, and a roster of experts to deploy. And TA is really super important when you want to mitigate risk in these SMEs that are small. You give the company a bit of support to make sure that they can pay the dues, they can enhance the impact, etc. So it's up and running, and it's a very important part of this project. And we're very happy to get it financed by the Canadians. So I just want to stop here and say that. We also the ones that are the originator. That means the ones that's going to provide most of the pipeline to Bamboo. Now, and now with that prep, we're really at the takeoff now. With the capital coming in, with the TA facility set up, we do have 77 deals in our pipeline. So let me just tell you a bit about how we source our deals. And it might get a little detailed, but I think it's interesting for everyone to know. So the first channel you see there is through UNCDF's program. So we have around 30 plus programs in our organization, and they go from renewables, agribusinesses, fintech and microfinance, local infrastructure, and also climate finance. So we're in good contact with all of them. And when they are maybe give a grant to one of their investees, and the investee is growing, then if we put it on our radar, and it might be something for our own balance sheet, but also for deals. So that's one way that we source deals. We're also increasingly looking into working with other UN agencies. So we're informing them now the build fund is capitalized. Do you have deals that you want to see growing of that? So we have our network out. We have a few staff that really only working with the wider UN system to support them. And so this is the second channel that we do. And we have already deals from UNDP, UN Women, UNIDO, and WFP in our pipeline. So that's looking good. The third channel is to work with our partners, our development partners. And for example, SIDA is coming in with a guarantee, and they wanted us to look at their challenge funds. They have a number of challenge funds, and these challenge funds are producing promising SDG positive companies, and we want to see if we can help them grow. So that's another channel that we're going to look through. Then, of course, we are a bunch of investment specialists. We have our network. We are close to many other impact investors, so we may also look into what that network gives us in deal flows. And lastly, but not least, this is a mix, a joint venture with BCP. So BCP will also, Bamboo Capital will also come with some leads. And we think that's going to be an excellent mix, actually, because we will come with smaller SMEs. They might come with a bit larger ticket sizes, and that's going to diversify risk and be good for everybody. So I think that. Now, when we've done this sourcing through these 5 different channels, we have arrived at 77 prospects. Now, what we have done, and we looked into how a funnel would look like that would be satisfying. So we are saying that we probably need around 15 prospects in the end of the year to capitalize around, say, 20 million. And if we are going to get to 15 prospects, we need around 90 at the beginning. And that's the funnel. So you need to work through all of that down to the 15. And you see there that we have 11 that is not initiated, right? So that's in the beginning, and they have been allocated to investment specialists, so they will be reviewed. We have 18 under screening, and screening is really when they are, we have a first call with the prospect, and we're trying to understand their basic finance position and their need. And then we go and write a bit of a memo. That's going to be a 2-pager. And at that stage, we actually contact Bamboo Capital, and we have an agreement if this looks promising or not. If it looks promising, we take it to the next step, which is the detailed due diligence. And the detailed due diligence is very, I think we moved ahead a little, but yes, thank you. So the detailed due diligence is often done in the field, right? So therefore, it's quite important when you do the pre-due diligence that you make the right decision, because there's a lot of cost involved in detailed due diligence. So we're very careful that we select the ones that really looks promising there, and then we do the detailed due diligence, which usually take a few weeks, and then that is referred into the IC for decision. And remember that here is where sort of UNCDF's responsibility ends and Bamboo takes over. They run their investment committee, of course, and we have nothing to do with that. So it can be a yes or no, even though we have referred it in there. So maybe we can go to the next slide. Yeah, and here you see, a snapshot of our pipeline and how it looks today. And you see that there is, we have around 73% of the pipeline from Africa, which is not, strange, because we are focusing on the LDCs, and most LDCs are in Africa. But we have a 27 in Asia, and that also includes Pacific, because we have some prospects in the Pacific as well. And it all adds up to around an ask from these companies of 55 million, right? So it's much more than we have in the fund. But then again, we're going to have the fund, and we're just going to, pick out the ones that make sense for the fund in terms of investment thesis. And let me also say then that it's important, right, when you do the funnel and pick the winners of the ones for the fund, that say that we don't want to have crazy risk, very risky companies that we see a very low probability of surviving, even though they have outstanding impact, because that would not be good for the performance of the fund. On the other hand, we don't want to take too commercial investments into the fund, because that's an investment that we hope others will take. So we'll find that niche in between those different categories. Yeah, next one. I just want to end with giving you, a flavor of 3 of the companies that are in our pipeline now. First is Green Mountain Arabica Coffee from Rwanda. They are looking for funding because they've been renting their processing plants, so they want to have their own to become more independent. So this is a company that is producing green certified coffee. They have a woman owner, and they're buying from women cooperatives, and it was actually sourced through UN Women. So they came with this. The second one, Altic, is actually a grantee. It received a grant from us a few years back, has been developing their business model and has been very successful. So now they are ready for more commercial funding, and will then hopefully receive a loan from the Build Fund. They produce solar home systems, but also clean cooking systems. And here is to help them build the inventory and sell that. And lastly, we have a microfinance bank, a women's micro bank limited from P&G. This is a very interesting transaction as well. They received a grant from UNCDF to build a biometric method to identify, to have as an ID certificate for their borrowers. So women usually didn't have the documents or the papers to provide to banks. So here's a way of of making that work, and it's been very successful. So they received the grant to develop that. Then they received a loan from us of, I think, 200K, which they paid back. And they are now having actually a guarantee from UNDP and UN Women to expand even further. And their next step is to get a loan from the Build Fund. So I think that's also a very nice story. I'll end there and just saying that, as JP said, this is an open-ended fund. So sky is the limit, and we want to be bigger than BlackRock. That's our internal motto. So just give us a few years and we'll be there. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Anders, for a very insightful and succinct presentation. Honorable guests today, we can now go into the panel discussion, and I would like to take the opportunity to introduce Ambassador Ray. Ambassador Ray is a Canadian diplomat, lawyer, negotiator, public speaker, and former politician who is the current ambassador since 2020. He was appointed Canada's special envoy to Myanmar in October 2017 and advised Prime Minister Justin Trudeau on the Rohingya crisis as well. He's also a senior fellow at the Raoul Wallenberg Center for Human Rights. On July 6, 2020, his appointment as Canadian ambassador to the UN was announced by Prime Minister Justin Trudeau. Upon his marriage to Ms. Ray, he has 3 daughters, and he was earlier living in Toronto. So thank you, Ambassador Ray. I would like to now turn over to other distinguished panelists as well to briefly introduce themselves. So may I request James Cashman from DFC to introduce himself, please.
Thanks, Abhisheik. Jamie Cashman. I'm an investment officer with the U.S. International Development Finance Corporation. Really happy to be part of the panel today.
Mr. Thomas Lammar from the Permanent Mission of Luxembourg to the UN.
Thank you, Abhisheik. I'm a counselor at the Luxembourg Mission to the UN, as you said. I headed the Inclusive and Innovative Finance Department of our Development Corporation until summer last year. So a bit of a background in the sector.
Thank you, Mr. Lammar. Ms. Karin Svensson, who's here virtually from SIDA.
Yes, hello again. So I'm Karin Svensson. I'm SIDA's project manager for global investors for sustainable development. And I'm also a coordinator of our committee for financing for development and institution development. So happy to be with you here.
Thank you, Ms. Svensson. Mr. Anders Aabo from Norad.
Yeah, very good morning and afternoon to you all. My name is Anders Aabo, and I'm a senior advisor in our section for private sector and new partnerships at Norad, and mainly work on innovative and blended finance mechanisms and instruments. So I'm delighted to be here today and be a part of this great event. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Anders. And last but not the least, Ms. Isabel Leroux from Nordic Development Fund. If you could please introduce yourself.
Yes, hello. Hello, everybody. I'm Isabel Leroux, Program Manager at the Nordic Development Fund. NDF is the joint financial institution of the Nordic countries, including Finland, Sweden, Norway, Denmark, and Iceland, and we are based in Helsinki. We finance projects and in the nexus of development and climate, and it's great to be here. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Isabel. So coming back to the discussion this morning, may I now pose a question to all the panelists, and maybe we start with Ambassador Ray. Could you please share with us what is the funding commitment that Global Affairs Canada is making towards the Build Fund? And anything else about that?
Well, before I announce the number, because it's a spectacular number, I'm going to just build up a little bit, if I may, just to say it's delighted to be here and to be able to share the platform with so many knowledgeable and committed people, and particularly appreciated hearing from Minister Kinteh, who has really made a powerful presentation this morning. As well as with our Jean-Philippe from Bamboo Capital. It seems to me that we, in order to understand what we're doing, we need to, I think, understand the problem. There's a number of issues. One of those, how do we mobilize private capital? Because if we don't mobilize private capital, we're not going to be able to develop the funding required to address the gaps that exist and that are very, very clear. It's clear that private capital won't necessarily do it on its own. So we then have to provide incentives, and we have to provide stronger partnerships from the public sector to make it happen. And if we can do that and begin to scale up these projects, then we're in a much better position in order to be able to address the key issues. The other key issue is how do we develop capacity within the poorest countries that will allow them to enter into the marketplace and be able to engage with discussions about how we structure financing in a way that's going to make sense for them and going to make sense for the investors. So I congratulate UNCDF for creating this initiative. I think it's really significant. We are contributing over 25 million to the fund, to the Build Fund, and we're contributing another 6 something into the technical fund. The technical fund is designed to help the people who are asking for the investment, and the Build Fund is the capital that's going to provide for the blended finance. So we're very, very happy to be doing this. Since coming to New York, I have co-chaired the Friends for Financing Development, which took place in the middle of COVID. So it was a very active discussion about how we respond to the extent of the COVID crisis. And have also been involved as a co-facilitator of the LDC renewal, which will take place in Doha next year. It's been postponed. So if you like, this announcement today is a commitment by Canada to be actively participating in what we think is a key initiative, because it responds to the needs that are so clear, and because I think it allows us to do a job that clearly needs to be done. And as Jean-Philippe has said, the existing crises of COVID and of climate change and the embedded inequalities that are already there have been severely, dramatically added to by the Ukraine crisis and the Russian invasion and the consequences of that. And we need to understand this is a very difficult time in the life of the world, and we have to take care of those who are in the greatest need. And I think this helps us to do it. And the last thing is that, you know, one of my lessons from my political life is that there are always more good ideas than there is money. And we need to understand that dilemma. But one of the ways of really dealing with the question of money is for all of us to appreciate that we're not going to get out of the situation we're in without the active engagement of the private sector. Public capital alone can't do it. Public capital can be a catalyst for other forms of investment that are very, very necessary. So we're delighted to be part of this partnership, because we think it's a great idea and we think it responds to a huge public need, and we're very glad to be doing it. Thanks for the opportunity.
Thank you, Ambassador Ray, and thanks to Canada for their commitment to the Build Fund. May now turn to Jamie for his remarks on the motivation behind supporting Build Fund, and also what's the commitment from DFC to the fund. Over to you.
Thanks again, Abhisheik. And I commend the ambassador on what I think is perhaps the clearest statement of the problem and the contribution that Build Fund is playing in terms of providing a potential solution to the problem here. And that's what motivated our participation as a development finance organization. The U.S. International Development Finance Corporation, or DFC as we're commonly known, is participating in the Build Fund in 2 forms. First, in partnership with the U.S. Agency for International Development, and in direct collaboration with SIDA, we are going to share in the risk of loss on loans that the Build Fund makes to its downstream borrowers in the least developed countries, up to $5 million. So we're part of that catalytic tranche, that credit enhancement that is so important for bringing private sector investors into a fund like Build Fund. Separately, the DFC will be participating as an investor in the Build Fund. So we'll be providing a loan to the fund up to $10 million. This capital will be used for the Build Fund, for Bamboo Capital, to be able to make investments in these SMEs. Anders, I think, touched on a lot of the elements of the build fund structure and the partnership between UNCDF and Bamboo Capital that make this so attractive to us. I think it's a really compelling combination of strengths that became easy for us to want to support. Our motivation for participating in the build fund is probably twofold. On the one hand, we were recruited by UNCDF and the team at SIDA, with whom we have a long-standing partnership for guarantees, to consider participating in the fund as a co-guarantor. And secondly, I think we were encouraged by our colleagues at USAID, the Agency for International Development, who, like SIDA, have participated in these challenge funds that have helped to provide grant capital for very promising SMEs. And for us, this build fund represents the continuum of that progression of capital. And so we're really happy to be part of it. Thanks again, Abhisheik.
Thank you, Jamie, and thanks for flagging the investment continuum that Anders and his team have been propagating a lot. And thank you very much for your contribution. May I now turn to Mr. Thomas Lammar from the mission of Luxembourg to the UN. Considering that Luxembourg came in as an anchor investor when we were still designing the build fund, I'll turn it over to you for your remarks. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Abhisheik and Preeti, Sinha, Minister, Excellencies, colleagues. Thanks also for the Mission of Canada for hosting us today. Well, as was mentioned before several times already, Luxembourg acted as the anchor investor of the Build Fund with the aim to create a permanent blending financing mechanism that will support sustainable development through financing SMEs in LDCs. By taking this first step, we actually wanted to show that the SDGs represent a worthwhile investment case. We really appreciate the momentum that has been created with the promising pipeline that you just presented. And this momentum is among donors, among private investors, we believe as well, and investees are certainly also expecting our investments. Luxembourg continues to allocate 1% of our GNI to official development assistance. However, it has become clear that this traditional and more grant-based aid alone will not be sufficient to translate the SDGs into reality. And this is actually where the financial sector can and should come in to help us to attract new pools of funding by sharing also the technical expertise and responding to demand for positive social impact and ecological accountability, which can be very much seen as an additional value to the added value that the financial returns provide. Our initial contribution was of €2 million, and it was facilitated through an innovative finance instrument known as the beneficiary units that serve as first loss capital and thereby reduce the risks for investors. And we are willing to absorb this risk in initiatives we believe in. And this catalytic role that we can play, we see it actually as an efficient and effective means of our development assistance.
Thank you very much, Mr. Lammar. May I now go on to the screen of our participants who are participating virtually here. So may I turn now to Ms. Svensson from SIDA to speak about SIDA's commitment to build fund, but also the motivations of SIDA to be joining this blended finance vehicle. Over to you, Ms. Svensson.
Thank you so much. Yes, so SIDA has also provided a portfolio guarantee of up to $5 million for a 10-year period. And the guarantee targets the part of the portfolio holding the assets with the highest risks, investments in frontier markets, LDCs. And at SIDA, we strongly believe in the concept of blended finance, channeling investments to where they are needed the most and where they can work for eradicating poverty and fulfilling the SDGs. And as I told you before, we're working also in partnership with Global Investors for Sustainable Development, convened by the UN and the Secretary General. And the partners in GISC, they tell us blended finance, yes, but we need to do more deals and larger deals. And that is why I like so much the comment by Anders Anders Berlin here, my former colleague, that this fund will grow in the future also, because there is a real and great potential here among investors. So at SIDA, we're raising the ambitions on the whole concept of financing for development. And of course, we have the guarantee frame of 18 billion Swedish crowns. And the objective for engaging with the Build Fund, well, it simply maps directly with our global strategies for international development cooperation. And yeah, as it will strengthen the private sector in the frontier markets, strengthen capital flows towards climate and biodiversity. And we also like that the fund will advance investments in financial inclusion, local infrastructure, architecture, and building local markets and investments in infrastructure. And also it will target the missing middle that has not otherwise so easy access to capital. So we think blended finance, yeah, it's part of shrinking the financial divide that has now grown greater. So we need to do more, and we need to do greater deals also. So thank you for now.
Thank you, Ms. Svensson. Before we go on to the next speaker, may I also ask the audience who's joined us virtually to start putting their questions in the Q&A box as well. May I now turn over to Ms. Leroux from the Nordic Development Fund for her response on the commitment as well as the motivation of NDF on joining the Build Fund. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Abhisheik. Well, I would say that there are a number of different reasons behind our motivation to join Build. As I mentioned, NDF works in the nexus of climate and development, and we particularly focus in our financing activities on building the adaptation and resilience capacities against the impacts of climate change of communities in lower income countries, and also contribute to regional and global efforts in addressing climate change mitigation. And currently NDF's strategy focuses on sub-Saharan Africa and the least developed countries, and we actively promote gender equality and the empowerment of women as agents of change in all of our financing activities. From our experience of financing early stage companies in green economy, we know that the SMEs in sub-Saharan Africa there is so much great untapped potential in those markets, but we also know that there is a critical need for adequate financing for these companies that can take them, they need tailored financing that can take them from the very early stage, piloting, proof of concept, to commercialization, and ultimately to solid business growth. And from this experience, we have so many valuable learnings, and we know that these companies really do have the solutions, and they have the capacity, and they really have that potential of really helping these countries to adapt and to address climate change impacts. Then from a different perspective, NDF is a concessional financier. And in this sense, from this perspective, the first loss tranche of the Build Fund aligns very well with our objectives of using our financing to mobilize other investors that might be less risk averse than we are, or that have different return expectations that NDF has. And of course, through this mobilization, we expect that we can achieve capital deployment at scale to these SMEs in LDCs and other low-income countries. So I think that bringing all of this together, looking at the investment strategy, the impact objectives, and the blended structure of the Build Fund, it is really a perfect fit for NDF and our mandate and strategic objectives. And this brings to the happy announcement that NDF is contributing a commitment of $10 million to the first loss tranche of the Build Fund. And we are really excited. We really look forward to the road ahead of us and consolidating a really strong and fruitful partnership with all of the partners at Build. And finally, I really want to convey a big thank you and congratulations to the UNCDF and Bamboo teams for this great milestone, but also for the great cooperation that has taken us to this very exciting day. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Isabel. Last but not the least, I would turn over to Anders from Norad. Norway has been a strong supporter of UNCDF for several years, and Norad made this commitment to the Build Fund quite early in the development process. So I'll turn it over to you, Anders, for your remarks on your commitment as well as the motivation behind supporting the Build Fund.
Yeah, thanks, Abhisheik. Yeah, you're right. We have been a supporter of UNCDF for a long time, and we're very happy to do so, and very excited about our partnership going forward as well. And I'm very pleased to announce that Norway is supporting the Build Fund in this initiative. We have committed about $3 million, also to the first loss layer, similar to Luxembourg and NDF. And an additional $900,000 to the Builder Technical Assistance Facility. And I should also mention that it was very important to us to support both facilities, as they are codependent on each other, especially in this SME segment. We see this large need for TA support, especially in these investment portfolios and also for prospective investees. And that is why the TA facility was also important for us to support. And then part of the motivations for us and what attracted us to make this commitment, few different reasons. I think first, supporting SMEs is a high priority area for us. These are critical. These businesses are critical to achieve the development agenda, especially in the least developed countries. It's the small and medium businesses that really drive the economic growth. They host the highest share of the workforce, and it's the segment that contributes the most to GDP. So if we really want to accelerate economic growth in these countries, we must work with the SMEs. And however, as has been also said, there is a huge gap in access to finance for these businesses, which is the second point that I wanted to make. Too few are providing that flexible capital that these businesses need. Banks are, as we know, almost absent from this segment. And also many private investors are also staying away due to the high risk or perceived risk. So we need to make financing more accessible for these good businesses that have that growth potential. So basically, like we needed someone to take leadership here. We needed someone that could break down these barriers to build something big enough that could move the needle and have the potential to scale, and build something that would send a signal to other investors that it is possible to serve this segment in a profitable and sustainable way. And that is what UNCDF and the Build Fund is trying to do. And the UNCDF is the right partner organization for us to do this, and that is why we're very excited to be a supporter of the Build Fund. And congratulations to you all for putting this all together and seeing how it is coming together now. It's very exciting. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Anders. This has been amazing that we have heard just now over $60 million of commitment to the Build Fund. So congratulations to everybody here, but specifically Anders and JP, to your teams and for creating this platform. I would have maybe ask one more question to all the panelists in no particular order, but if we had sort of a blue sky thinking, what would be your expectation from the Build Fund which will make you very happy? Maybe just 1 or 2 lines on that would be appreciated. So over to you, Jamie, for your, and then Ambassador for your comments.
Well, I like the aspiration that Anders articulated, that the Build Fund, that this will be bigger than BlackRock. I mean, right? We shoot high. We're not going to get there if we don't have high aspirations like that. But I think a partner like Bamboo Capital, JP is a true visionary. And I think if anyone's going to be able to achieve this, it's going to be an organization like Bamboo Capital Partners that understands how important this is. For us, I'd go back to the continuum that Anders had articulated in describing the key elements of the Build Fund here. This is already in evidence through some of the pipeline companies that have been recipients of grants through challenge programs for SIDA and UNCDF system and USAID. And then they've been the recipient of small loans that they've been able to repay to UNCDF. And now they're potentially ready for financing from an impact investment fund like Bamboo Capital's Build Fund. And then the next phase of this is, of course, that they're ready for commercial capital that doesn't need to have this de-risking that's built into it. Anders from Norad identified that in large part, it's the risks or the perceived risks that are keeping away private sector investors from these important investments and these potentially profitable investments that they could be making. And that for us is our hope for the Build Fund, is that it's a proof statement, again, that the risk is as much perceived risk as it is real risk, and that there are ways that smart investors can structure investments that will increase the chances that they're going to have not only a commercial level of investment return, but also a tremendous level of developmental impact with their investments. So that's what we expect will be accomplished through the Build Fund.
Thank you so much, Jamie. Ambassador, we would love to hear your thoughts.
I think the key thing is to develop success stories and to give a real human face to what it means to build a successful business. The focus on women, the fact that there are so many people who are living in deep poverty, and as in all of our countries and all of our human experiences, that the way out of poverty is not through grants that sustain you in a humanitarian way. That's necessary for us to do, but it's key to develop successful businesses and jobs and opportunities for people. And the more we can share those stories effectively and communicate those stories, I think that's the best way to de-risk things, because we need to understand this is a shared human experience. Even from the pictures that were put up, you can get a sense of a coffee business. People can understand, yeah, I get that. And this is how we get it done. This is how we do it. We need to set up our own processing facility. We want to get going. We've got a market. We've got a plan. And you develop confidence. And when you develop confidence, you de-risk. And it's a truism, but it is true, is banks usually like to lend money when you don't actually need it. But when you need it, they're reluctant to do it. So we have to convince people who need to be convinced that this is a good place to put your money. And we also have to provide the assistance to people to be able to figure out how to work this complicated system. I mean, as a layperson, you listen to all the terms, and even when I learned this when I was in government many years ago, you need to break it down and to explain to people what it is you're doing, and then show them how it gets done and how it works. And I think that's the critical thing. Good, successful stories that are based on reality of the experience that's lived. That's how you build a fund. And that's how you build a story that will convince people this is something that absolutely has to be done. Canada is persuaded from all of our experience in the development field that we have to do things that are more innovative, but we also have to respond to the need, which is huge. And we also have to create opportunities for people to make money. And that means the women who are working and to create a business, but it also means the people whose capital is required to help that business to grow. So I think that's how you become, I hate to be the iconoclast here. To me, it would be nice if we could be bigger than BlackRock. Of course you want to be big, but the thing you really want to do is to make sure that the way you get to be big is step by step. And step by step means convincing people on the basis of successful experience. that we can actually do this, because there's still people out there who are skeptical, even though Canada is certainly convinced that we can do this, and we want to be part of this success story, because that's how we're going to create more success.
Thank you so much, Ambassador. Those are very helpful words for us to keep in mind as we go through the journey with Build Fund. And I can attest to your point that bankers don't lend, as a former banker, when people need money. So thank you for that comment. I can see Karin's hand. So Karin, over to you.
Thank you. Well, we have many expectations from SIDA, of course, but the most important is we hope that this fund in the long run will show a sustainable impact, in addition to financial performance, of course, and success that can draw attention from the big financial flows to the frontier markets. Because investors are now looking for positive, sustainable impact that they can report back to their shareholders and the policyholders. And we think that the international community really needs to work to find the new financial architecture that can attract the big flows. And this is what is needed from the partner countries and what is asked from the investors. And we see a potential here for the Build Fund. Thank you.
Thank you, Karin. I see Thomas from Luxembourg has his comments.
Thank you. My in-person hand was raised. So yeah, the main objective, and I think therefore also the expectation for Luxembourg, is to contribute to the eradication of poverty. And I think with its strong focus on LDCs, on impact on women's entrepreneurships, the Build Fund fits perfectly into this framework. On the ground, we see that there is indeed a large need and demand, as SMEs have important unmet financing needs and require our support, and because they represent really the backbone of developing economies. As an example, a colleague sent me these statistics this morning. They represent 90% of businesses and more than 50% of employment worldwide. So this is really where a big share of the development comes from. Luxembourg has worked for a long time and was at the forefront of the microfinance sector. Today, our discussions focus on the missing middle, but I think it was mentioned also by my colleague here that SMEs are part of a continuum. So what we should do is also work along this spectrum from micro to small to medium enterprises, but also to promote responsible practices and the respect of human rights among larger firms. And for this, we have various tools, including grants for providing technical assistance to make SMEs ready for investments. We have digital innovation, and this can all help us to maximize the outcomes for the most vulnerable. At the same time, essential investments are also needed, because too often SMEs are left out by investors because of transaction costs, risks, or other factors. However, they create really, as I said earlier, they create economic opportunities and employment, as well as private and public resources, which we should not forget, and which are all essential to fight and overcome poverty and promote sustainable development. So therefore, we need to continue innovating and creating new mechanisms and partnerships that can help us move from publicly financed billions to jointly blended trillions. And it's great to hear that we look at scaling as one of the objectives. Jean-Philippe also mentioned bonds. I think that's really something that we hope we can work towards. I can also mention in this framework the SDG 500 platform, which the Build Fund is actually part of, and which represents a larger impact investment initiative, and which seeks actually to raise 500 million to support businesses. So I think that's also, if others are interested, the next step to go to scaling. And yeah, the Build Fund as such is very well positioned to contribute to this, and this is also where our expectations are, because I mean, in the end, one key argument is also for us that we want a reliable pipeline where we can be sure that it's really sustainable development focused. And what is more conducive to that than a pipeline that is actually produced by the United Nations themselves? So that's a good expectation and argument.
Thank you very much, Thomas, and thank you for putting that flag that we're working with the rest of the UN development system as well to build that pipeline, and we look forward to your support. I can see that Isabel has raised her hand for her comment. So over to you, Isabel.
Great, thank you. And thank you all the panelists for these very interesting points. Maybe echoing to these others' views that have been raised, I also agree that it's very important to get results and to get these demonstrable proof that you can actually make good investments in LDCs, and also that it's not always scary or too risky or just not, or that LDC companies are not good investment opportunities. Of course, many of the companies that Build will be investing in are in the early stage or in the growth stage. But one of the key issues that I think that in the long run Build will address is that there is simply not sufficient capital being mobilized to LDCs. And that capital that needs to be mobilized is the DFI capital, the commercial capital, the institutional capital. And simply the fact is that we need more. What they always say is that they need bankable projects, they need bankable good investment opportunities. So what I see is that ideally, now that Build will take in these early stage SMEs and grow them and help them to become mature investment opportunities to these other investors that then are looking for diversification of their portfolios, but to provide these opportunities to these investors, and this will directly lead to having more capital mobilized to LDCs, which in turn then will have an impact in poverty reduction and in gender equality and all of the things that we are all very interested in. So that is my addition. Thank you.
Thank you, Isabel. Anders, over to you.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, we also have very big expectations for the Build Fund going forward. Very excited about the developments now for the future, especially in the next few years, which will be critical. And maybe not something new to what has already been said. There's been a lot of really great things that have been said, but we like what the ambassador was saying, these success stories, and that is one of our big expectations. We want the Build Fund to be a success story. We want to see a portfolio that sets a precedence for successful SME financing and sends that positive signal to other investors, showcasing that there is a massive opportunity in this segment. And then also the second point on capital mobilization. So if we have these success stories, that will hopefully then lead to additional capital mobilization. We want to see, and we need to see, more private and commercial capital flow towards this SME segment and LDCs in more general. To close the financing gap for the SDGs, which we all know is immense, it will require a collective effort, but it must be the private sector that takes the leading role here. And then maybe just one last point on just blended finance in general. Like, this is the way to work. We recently set up an innovative and blended finance unit here at Norad. This is part of our strategy now as a development agency. And us development agencies, we have a very scarce form of development finance. We have highly risk accepting resources, but it's very limited. So we need to use this funding smarter, more catalytic. And that was the intention with our first loss commitment. It's meant to catalyze and attract private investors into that capital stack. So going forward, we expect more mechanisms like this. We expect development finance increasingly being used as blended instruments to de-risk and crowd in more private capital. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Anders and everybody. Now we can turn over to the audience here, but also we have some questions coming in the chat room. So maybe I'll turn to the room here if there are any questions. Otherwise, I can go on to the questions on the panel. Please use the mic for your question. Yes, please.
Yes.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Måns Hellesson from Swedish MFA. Thank you very much for this very interesting discussion, and thank you very much for the Canadian representation for this meeting. I have a question on how to use a blended financing in humanitarian context. I mean, we are talking about the challenge of how we can bridge development in humanitarian, the nexus. We are now faced with close to 100 million refugees in the world. 80% of those are in so-called protected situations. It means that they have stayed in exile for very long, some of them for decades. This context, which is very politicized, I mean, we know that people in these situations are mostly young people. They have ambitions. They have a lot of business ideas and so on. They have no access to funding. So how can blended financing make a contribution in those contexts? That's my very difficult question to the panel, because this is very much needed, and I think we are looking. If we are looking ahead now with the geopolitical situation in the world, we have to have some kind of an idea around that segment of people, because we are working with the 2030 agenda and we are supposed to be leaving no one behind, and those are the people leaving first behind. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Maybe I'll turn it over to the panel if anybody would like to.
I'll jump in. I couldn't agree more. I've been arguing with the orthodoxy of development for a while, saying that the notion that there's a hard and fast distinction between what's humanitarian and what's development is not true, because of the semi-permanent nature of many of the refugee communities that exist. My response to that is to say that refugees should be eligible for whatever we're trying to do, and that refugee-led enterprises exist today. They're large. Go into any refugee camp. They're places, they are very entrepreneurial places. People are selling things and buying things, and they're exchanging, and they're trying to move on, despite the very difficult nature of the circumstance in which they find themselves. And so I would hope that we would be able to respond to that need. I think UNHCR is moving in that direction. I think that many people are recognizing that we have to break down the barriers that exist at the moment, and understand that there will be opportunities and needs that need to be responded to. And I think one of the key changes that we see in the world today is something called refugee agency. Refugees are not objects of help only. They are active participants in their own survival and in their own prosperity, potentially. And I think we have to convince host countries that this is no threat to them, that in fact it benefits them to have enterprises that can provide opportunities for refugees, as well as for permanent residents and citizens of host countries. And these barriers are hard to break down, but we do have to break them down. And there's no question that unless we succeed in doing this, refugees will be left behind, as frankly, they are in a great many places, because of this sense that these people are isolated and they're being kept in corners, and they're not being allowed to break out of the corners that they're in. And I think we're going to have to help in that process. And as a donor country, that's something we want to continue to work on.
Thank you, Ambassador.
Thank you. Maybe let me say that there's a continuum. So we are working now on peace as well. So first is to invest to reduce armed conflict, and therefore perhaps the reducing of the creation of refugees. So for example, we are investing in Burundi and DRC and Rwanda. We have got the forest area where armed conflicts still exist. So in collaboration with the Peace Building Fund, we are creating a program that will invest in SMEs, in solar, etc. And then some of that profit goes towards conservation. So again, a blended fund financing mechanism in some ways that let's take some of the grant money from the PBF, and I'll turn over to Anders if he has further to add, and then create energy companies there so businesses can flourish. So that's the peace continuum. That's kind of the early attempt to stop armed conflict. And then when you get to the refugees, so for example, I truly believe, certainly it's an investable community. We're working in northern Uganda. There is a refugee community there. We find investing in through digital mechanisms, perhaps digital models where they can be where they are, but start businesses, some degree of local development. How does the community as well kind of create a structure that can then eventually lead to better living conditions? So those are some of the tools, and I'll turn to my colleagues if they'd like to give a specific example. But I also want to acknowledge we're working in Afghanistan as well to recuperate the economy. I have colleagues here, Matthias, and looking at the banking system there, and women entrepreneurs strengthening the banking system so they can get back on their feet. Thanks.
Anders, over to you.
Yeah, very short. So I think we have to also agree that some issues or some areas are only for public good, right? So there is no business models for private finance, right? So we need to see, or at least we can look at how much public funding do you need for the private come in. When we talk about humanitarian challenges, I think the need for public funding is more. So the blend needs to be different from, for example, the build fund we're talking now. That build fund would not invest in these areas, right? But as Preeti was mentioning, we're working in Burundi DRC, where it's conflict structure. It's a very complex project where you're actually trying to get in private finance with some public funding as well. And we're also working in these refugee camps, and here we're working with portfolio guarantees, and portfolio guarantees are really good instruments. You can find instruments in the blended finance toolkit that is really good for these kind of endeavors, but you need more public money than you need in other endeavors, that I would say. Oh.
Thank you, Anders, and thank you for your question. We will now go on to some of the questions being posed online. Maybe we won't be able to cover all of them, but we'll start with the first one. Ms. Kinteh from Gambia, the minister from Gambia, has actually a question for the panelists. How can projects like the Women Enterprise benefit from the Build Fund? Maybe JP or Anders, if you would like to take that. JP, would you like to address that?
Maybe I'll let Anders go first. But essentially, the purpose of the Build Fund is to lend money directly to early stage companies with a clear gender angle. So I don't see why this would not be a fit. We are focusing on these developing countries, early stage companies, small amounts of debt to start with, of course, with the hope to grow this financing and grow those entrepreneurs, hopefully women entrepreneurs and women owners and women managers and women clients of those companies. So that's I guess that's an easy answer, but maybe Anders, you want to complement that.
No, I agree. I think when we look in our pipeline, we will work very closely with those programs that are working with women entrepreneurs, and I think that's where we've found with a very fruitful collaboration with UN Women, but also some of the programs that we have ourselves and other UN agencies. Now, what we look at is the ownership, right? So, do we have women ownerships? That's one of the key. The second is management. Do we have women manager here? And the third thing is the workforce. And the fourth thing is the beneficiaries or the clients. So these things we're screening our companies to make sure that they are women oriented. And frankly speaking, we have good, better records of performing when we work with women than that. So that's also a good thing.
Thank you so much, Anders and JP. We're coming towards the end of the hour of this discussion, but maybe we have time for one last question. So somebody has asked, it's an anonymous question of, could the distinguished panel advise on what type of financial mechanism are being used for investment, i.e. type of debt investments or equity-based investments? JP, would you like to?
Sure,
Please.
I'm happy to answer. I mean, this is mostly debt investments. Different kinds of debt. We'll look at collateralized or uncollateralized debt, longer term debt, shorter term debt, obviously local currency debt, hopefully with some hedging whenever possible. So this is mostly a fixed income instrument. There is a provision that a very small amount of the portfolio could be equity investment, but frankly, I believe that we'll start with debt and we'll see how it goes, and we'll see with time whether we take advantage of this very small portion of equity. So this is mostly debt financing.
Thank you very much, JP. Now I'll turn towards Ms. Preeti Sinha for her closing remarks. We would request people who've asked those questions to send them via email. When they registered, they would have received an email address and they could send those questions to them, and we'll be happy to respond or bring it up to the panelists' attention. Over to you, Preeti.
Thank you. Let me close by saying the word wow. I think even though it's been an early morning, I think the passion, the commitment runs through all of us, and that's been a really warm feeling. So thank you so much to all partners, leaders on this remarkable journey now and into the future of the Build Fund. If today's news demonstrates anything, it is that there are innovative financing tools that can convene diverse stakeholders, align interest, leverage specific capacities and capabilities to unlock finance. Said more simply, the question is that we often hear when it comes to financing SDGs, so that we leave nobody behind, the question is not why should we do it, but how should we do it? Today we are addressing how we are doing this. Today my hope is that the development finance world will look at the Build Fund as a powerful, innovative and impactful answer to the question of how. This leads to my call for action. We often hear the call to the private sector to become an active, intentional, robust agent for sustainable development. But let's ask again to finally and fully commit to embracing the path of stakeholder capitalism. And we invite and we call out to the private sector to join us in this journey. I also call to action, of course, the continuing participation and commitment of our stakeholders here, the governments, the donor governments, the recipient governments, local, regional, central, NGOs, philanthropic organization, international finance organization, development finance organization, and yes, of course, the United Nations as well. We're going to ask the private sector to increase its appetite, our role as partners on the concessional side, and recognizing the continued commitment of ODA. The ODA announced by OECD for 2021 is $178 billion. This remains steady and growing despite turbulent times, up from about $150 billion last year. But perhaps to ask that capital to chart its way forward, as many of you mentioned, towards an appetite for risk and innovation, perhaps considering more the leverage effect of what this capital can do. So we would hopefully lead with some of that involvement, the impetus to create vehicles into which private capital can flow in. So the role of public capital to do the de-risking so that more can be done. My sincere belief is that the Build Fund represents precisely the embrace of risk and innovation that we need to unlock private capital. We hope that capital will serve humanity and not the other way around. That is our future hope. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Sinha. So with that, we bring this session to an end. Thank you for all the participants, all the panelists. It was a pleasure hosting you today. And thank you for, again, Ambassador Ray, for the mission in Canadian mission to host us for this first hybrid event we've done in recent times. So thank you. Have a good day, evening.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye to all.